Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This is the Darklight Emissary, and today's video is going to go over how Chaos Corruption works and can you be redeemed from it. If you are new to this channel, you may have found this from having first played the new Space Marine 2 game, and in that game we do come across some Chaos Forces, those of the Thousand Suns Legion. That Legion is one of my favorite factions in Warhammer, for reasons I won't go into in this video, but they are a good anchor point for a lot of what I'm going to talk about here today with Chaos Corruption and how it works, and whether there is any hope for someone that is damned or corrupted by Chaos, and how they can come back from it, potentially, perhaps. Now, at the beginning of this, the very short answer is there has not been a case of someone being redeemed from Chaos. That has never happened in the 20 plus years I've been reading the lore, and it isn't something that is just talked about lightly within the universe as something that is even possible. Normally, if someone is corrupted by Chaos, the Imperial response is going to be to try to destroy them utterly and then burn the remains, because even the remains could be corrupted on a physical level even after you are destroy the enemy that is either animating that body, or the person itself was still alive and you defeated them. Ultimately, Chaos Corruption is so pernicious that it's not good enough to just destroy your enemy, but to destroy the enemy down to its base atoms, because even that is corrupt, and even touching or being in the influence of an object or former person corrupted could be enough to corrupt you as well, or at least make you a vector point for it. It's appropriate that one of the Chaos Gods is Nurgle, who is representative of death and decay and creates warp-infused disease, because even the other three gods and their influence on the warp and its corruption is also pernicious like a disease. Nurgle might specialize in that, but the other three are also corrupting, and in a way that could be likened to a incurable illness or disease that infuses itself into you, or is like a parasite that takes control of you. All of that can kind of apply to any of the four Chaos powers, and if you become ensnared by them. And so at first glance, at least as far as the Imperium is concerned, there is not really redemption or a way to cleanse someone of Chaos Corruption, or at least not trusting to any methods that would be offered, at least I would say. Now, other factions like the Aeldari or the Necrons, someone like that, they have not offered a way to expunge corruption. The Aeldari certainly I don't think have a way to. They have never offered anything in that direction. They seem to think that Chaos can only be fought against both physically and mentally as well, and to destroy sources of corruption, but not to necessarily cleanse anything of it. And then the Necrons know how to cut off warp connections, but they don't seem to know of a way to cleanse something already corrupted either, other than through destruction. So across the board, across most factions that most deal with Chaos, they all have the answer of, destroying the Chaos Corruption, and there's not a way to process or refine it into something pure or cleanse it completely of that Chaos connection. Now, while it not be possible to cleanse yourself of Chaos Corruption, the corruption can only be skin deep. It can only be physical at times. And a great poster child for this is the Soul Drinkers chapter of Space Marines, who were deceived by Tzeentch and corrupted physically. They, had different mutations, like their chapter master Sarpedon has spider legs, for example. He mutated into half an arachnid, but his upper half is still Space Marine with plate armor still and all that from Space Marine armor. So he looks like a Space Marine from the waist down, and then spider legs. Another member of that chapter had a very oversized, I think, right arm that allowed for him to swing a chain axe much more powerfully. So they got some boosts to their physical prowesses, but mentally they didn't seem corrupted by Tzeentch. They were deceived to work for Tzeentch at times, but they never worshipped Tzeentch or wanted to, and the moment that one of Tzeentch's demons appeared to them, the demon prince Abraxas, or it's a greater demon, I forget which, but Abraxas showed up to them, said, "I've been deceiving you. You should come work for Tzeentch full-time," essentially. Sarpedon said no, and he was able to banish the demon by a stab through the heart with a spear weapon that was essentially like a void weapon. Like, it essentially like gave off either antimatter or something very destructive to real space, and stabbed through the heart of this demon prince and sent it back to the warp. But that corruption is enough for anyone in the Imperium to basically avoid them or want to exterminate them outright, so they've been on the run for the most of their lore. I mean, at this point, they're destroyed in the lore, and there is a reboot of them with Primarchs Marines now, but none of those Marines are from the original chapter. So unless we get a follow-up story where the few surviving members of that chapter show back up and we have kind of a weird reunion between the new Marines and the old guard, who knows what's going to happen there. But I digress. My point is that they were corrupted on a physical level. And then just because you're corrupted by chaos does not mean that you can't fight against chaos still. And this is a more interesting example of something like this. So there is a book called Demon World. It's an older book by an author named Ben Counter, who does not do anything for 40k anymore for I don't know what reason. He wasn't considered one of the best authors, but I kind of miss him in a way because I feel like he helped kind of give me a foundation on 40k lore. So I can recommend his books to you. They're mostly older lore now, and some of it might not be completely accurate to current agreed upon lore that is considered the accurate canon right now, but a lot of it has very cool battle scenes and really cool depictions of like the Gothic architecture and things like that in his books. And his books tend to have kind of a dark grittiness that I don't see in a lot of authors' current novels in them. But anyway, Demon World it takes place on a demon world in the warp, and this world is called Torvendis. And this world is fought over by the four powers of chaos, by the four chaos gods. That's kind of like a jewel world. Like, they really all like covet this world, and they fight over it constantly as part of the great game. And if you don't want this book spoiled for you, I recommend skipping for like the next 5-ish minutes, and we'll jump back into other stuff. But essentially, the reason I bring this up is there is a Chaos Champion talked about throughout the book named Argulion Vek. And a lot of the book kind of covers legends of Argulion Vek's exploits as a champion of chaos throughout history. And Argulion it doesn't quite say how this happened, but Argulion seemed to have taken possession of a Word Bearer's Space Marine's body, and the Word Bearers are a major Chaos Legion at this point. And he brought this Space Marine's body that he's now puppeting to this world of Torvendis. And then he was able to basically cut himself out of the Space Marine armor, essentially, which was a bit weird. Like, this Space Marine armor was like half flesh and had eyeballs all over it, so apparently he cut himself out of it and looks more like a regular man after that. Like, no one seemed to see him as a Space Marine or anything close to an Astartes body. There was no comment or observation, at least, by anyone who ran into him after this point. But anyway, Argulion ends up on this world, and his entire desire is essentially to not serve chaos anymore, despite being one of their favorite chaos champions. And so Argulion seems to have a plan to not serve them anymore, but this does not seem to include redemption. Instead, Argulion intended to destroy this planet, which happened to originally be a Eldar Maiden world, which Eldar Maiden worlds have some kind of sentience embedded into them. They seem to be self-aware of their own existence. And in the past, Torvendis had fought the Maiden world's sentience and basically paralyzed it. And so this world within the Eye of Terror is now, a corrupted chaos world, and the Maiden world, though, is still alive within it. And so Argulion finds a way to convince some of the locals to go find this sword in some kind of cavern inside of the world. They pull the sword out, and it turns out this sword was the thing keeping the world from fighting back. And then once it wakes back up, it sees its own corruption. It's basically crazed and insane, and it starts tearing the world apart. Argulion, meanwhile, had made it back to a ship in orbit he was using, which happened to be a Dark Age of Technology level ship, which is very rare to see. And several word bearers that were tracking down their former comrade find him. They get in a fight on that ship, although it's very one-sided. Argulion just easily dodges their bolter shots and just obliterates all of them. And then he takes the ship and flies it into the world as it's just being destroyed to, hopefully kill himself along with everyone else on this demon world, and as kind of like a final middle finger to the Chaos Gods themselves to lose both him as their Chaos Champion as well as the world itself. Now, whether this worked or not, who knows? Maybe they took his soul and tortured it for eternity afterwards, because if you die, your soul goes into the warp anyways. It's connected to the warp, and Argulion was already a Chaos Champion of the warp, and, his soul was already bonded to the Chaos Gods, essentially. He seemed to be a Chaos Champion of undivided chaos, so he didn't seem to adhere to one of the four, but anyways, he was able to turn against them, and they didn't seem to notice this, and then he was able to take away a prize or two from the Chaos Gods as kind of a final way for him to rebel against those forces he no longer wished to serve. But this is one of the only times I've ever seen this, where someone that is corrupted by chaos actively fights against it. And yes, there's the lost lore of Malal, the fifth Chaos God, who fights against the other four, but that's not current lore. It's not considered real. So, you could say that Argulion maybe in another timeline was able to meet with Malal, and that's why he did what he did, but that's not considered true at this point. It seems that Chaos Champions have some kind of willpower of their own and can rebel against their patron gods, given certain parameters. You've got like Mortarion, the demon Primarch of the Death Guard Legion. Mortarion tends to kind of do his own thing, and he doesn't like to follow just the will of Nurgle. And this is actually a contention point in the latest Dark Imperium novels, where you have his former first captain, Typhus, who basically is telling him he needs to follow, Father Nurgle's plans, or he's going to be punished, and Mortarion basically kind of like saying, I'm still going to do what I want, and my plans are serving Nurgle, even though they were more serving his own personal vendettas. And it is said in one of these books, as well as in one of the last Horus Heresy books, musing on Mortarion specifically, that it's considered a paradox that, a Primarch, a Demon Prince Primarch, can choose their own choice, but also they are really not choosing their own choice. It's considered a paradox. So, because at the end of the day, a Demon Prince or Greater Demon is a literal part of their god. They aren't just simply serving that god. Part of that god is infused into their very being. You can't easily unsnare someone from essentially having barbed hooks all throughout them without significant scarring or possibly them bleeding out. It seems similar with chaos corruption, that you can't simply just go, I'm going to cleanse myself of this. It's very pernicious. It's very infecting, and even if the Chaos Gods give you some leeway as one of their more powerful servants, you are still ultimately at their beck and call. And to kind of go back to Demon World just for a second, I just want to recommend that book to you if you've never read it, because it's one of the only books where there is zero POV from any Imperial forces. It's entirely Chaos-aligned characters that book follows. And I don't know of any other books that really do that. Most books have at least one Imperial POV, even if the main POV is from a Chaos warband member or sorcerer or whoever it might be. Usually they're up against some kind of Imperial force or Inquisitor or something. Demon World is unique in that it doesn't have any of that. It's simply Chaos forces fighting each other, and we kind of get to see a bit of the great game playing out against the Chaos Gods against each other, where the Imperium is not mentioned really at all. The closest we get to that is the Word Bearers, but they are purely a Chaos force now. They are not an Imperial force and haven't been for a long time at this point in this novel. Another good example of someone who is Chaos corrupted but doesn't exactly follow Chaos directly or its plans, or at least he doesn't intend to, I would say, is probably Ahriman, the chief librarian sorcerer of the Thousand Suns, who, if you've been playing Space Marine 2, is the secondary antagonists. We are very lucky that Ahriman didn't show up, because he would make Imura, the chief sorcerer in that game, look like a plaything, and we would all be dead from having played that. Our characters, at least, is what I mean. Ahriman is an insanely powerful psyker. He is one of the most powerful in the setting, and he is considered basically the avatar of Tzeentch, because the Chaos Gods each have a Space Marine avatar or favored Marine. For Khorne, we have Karn the Betrayer. For Slaanesh, we have Lucius the Eternal. For Nurgle, we have Typhus, the Destroyer Hive. And for Tzeentch, we have Ahriman. And but that being the case, Ahriman has his own personal goals. And so while he can call upon very powerful warp energies and command forces of chaos because he is on their side of things, so to speak, he has personal goals and desires to redeem his legion from the Rubric Curse, which, if you're playing Space Marine 2, when you destroy a Rubric Marine, one of the main Chaos Marines you fight, you'll notice there is no blood. There's just dust that comes out of them, which is from the Rubric Curse that Ahriman himself accidentally cast upon his legion, turning the majority of them into dust encased in suits of armor. And then if you notice, when we fight sorcerers, they still bleed. And that's because any sorcerer over a certain level of power was not turned to dust, and instead saw their powers actually increase with the casting of the Rubric spell that Ahriman tried to use to stop mutations from happening in his legion, courtesy of Tzeentch. Now, obviously, being chosen by Tzeentch, Ahriman is ultimately serving that god's will. But Ahriman himself would never say this. If you were to meet him, he would not really be talking much about Tzeentch or about, his praise of the Changer of Ways. He would talk about how he desires to have his legion restored to him. Because the one thing that I would say isn't exactly unique about the Thousand Suns Legion, but certainly is so compared to some others, is that Ahriman and many of his fellow sorcerers are actually pretty selfless. Ahriman loves his compatriots. He loves the Thousand Suns Legion he's a part of, and he is doing what he needs to do out of a love for his lost comrades, which is very unique for Chaos forces, because you go look at other factions in Chaos, they're very selfish. They want to just gain more Chaos power. You have beings who just want to, get their own power aspiration recognized by the Chaos Gods so they can ascend and become a demon prince. Ahriman does not want to be a demon prince. He does not want to gain more power just for power's sake. He wants to gain more power and knowledge, and will do anything he can to obtain it so that he can bring his brethren back from the curse he set upon them. Now, ultimately, you can say he has taken selfish actions that have destroyed a lot of people's lives and a lot of atrocities committed in this purpose, but you cannot say that Ahriman explicitly is doing this out of worship for a Chaos God. And so this is kind of a point I'm bringing up, that Ahriman obviously is a slave to Chaos. He is corrupted by it, but he is not, at least personally, choosing to follow its will exactly. And so again, we kind of get an example of someone that might have corruption by Chaos, but is not necessarily doing Chaos's direct will. Not quite to the extent of the Demon World example. That character is one of the only ones I know of that is a Chaos champion that openly rebelled against Chaos, which Ahriman is not doing. But Ahriman simply doesn't want to do what Chaos wants on a meta level. He basically is... whatever he's doing, Tzeentch is obviously kind of plodding it along, because Tzeentch probably is enjoying giving Ahriman tastes of free will here and there. That's kind of Zench's style sometimes. But anyway, I kind of digress. My point is, we have another example of some corruption, but not necessarily someone who then just follows lockstep what Chaos would ultimately want, or what would help benefit Chaos the most, at least not directly, at least not at the intention of the corrupted individual. And so one of the main reasons why Chaos corruption is so pernicious is because humans, Aeldari, Tau to a very minimal extent, and most other living things in the galaxy all have a soul. And the soul is the direct connection between a living being and the warp. The warp is where souls come from. It's that spark of life that springs from the warp and then somehow creates a life in real space and melds with, a mortal physical shell, a body. Now, the Necrons are the only exception to this, and I don't think, if they had a warp connection when they had physical bodies, it was very weak. They never had any psychers or anything like that when they were the Necron tier. But they are the only real example of there being no soul connection to the warp, other than, like, pariahs in humanity or other species. And pariahs have no soul in the warp. And so, I don't know if a pariah could even be physically corrupted by chaos, maybe. But otherwise, pariahs are, like, immune to chaos corruption, it seems like. That's why the Sisters of Silence exist, and why the Emperor has them as one of his chief talons, because they can effectively fight chaos and not fall to it. It offers no allure to those who have no connection to it, because it has no purchase on them at all. But for the rest of everyone else, if you call attention to yourself, whether you read the true name of a demon in a book you shouldn't read, or you're a psyker that is unsanctioned, and your power draws denizens of the warp like a light beacon to you, then you are in more danger of being corrupted or outright possessed or destroyed by the creatures within the warp, by the demons, by the chaos gods. You are a vector for a kind of infection from that side of things. It can be almost said that most beings have at their heart, I guess, a miniature amount of corruption, because, if you have a soul connection to the warp itself is basically all corrupted at this point. Very small parts of it may not be. It used to be a not corrupted, chaotic place, but that was millions and billions of years previously. And so, with all that being said, like, that connection is what makes chaos corruption have a purchase on people, and why, basically you're kind of inflating that connection when you become corrupted by the chaos energy, or from dabbling in the arts that would bring that energy more into you. And it's why the Imperium goes to great lengths to scoop up psychers and either destroy them or vet them for being sanctioned, so that they're safe and they know how to train their minds to gate off against incursions from the warp. And in Space Marine 2, we see an example of that when Emura first shows up. The astropathic choir that is used to bring him through are a vector for a weak point for him to break through. And he takes possession of the main astropathic choir leader, the main astropath, and that was how he gained purchase into the world. And so that's a prime example again of how someone with a connection to the warp that was significant, when they opened up their minds, someone even more powerful was able to use that to bring themselves forward into real space from the warp itself. So I think you kind of get the picture. Like, chaos corruption is not something you can just simply wave your hand away and say, I don't want this anymore. The chaos gods are not going to allow you to. You might get lucky and be able to fight against them still, but even then, the gods tend to have the ability to turn you into a chaos horror, which is essentially just a writhing pile of limbs and flesh if you displease them. So, how exactly the Chaos Champion and Demon World was able to circumvent that kind of fate is not answered, but certainly if you are a servant of chaos, you are not easily going to get off that hook. It's very barbed and very embedded in you to a fundamental core degree. So I think I've instilled in you just how hard it would be to become redeemed, but let's talk about that possibility now. So we've never seen this happen, but we're going to put our speculation hat on, this is going to go back to the Emperor of mankind, the God Emperor of mankind himself. He is the only one possibly capable of chaos redemption. How exactly he would do it, we do not know, but he has suggested that possibility for Mortarion in the most recent Dark Imperium books, that there would be a path somehow for Mortarion to come back, but for now, go get punished by the god you chose to serve, ultimately. That's kind of what the Emperor said in a nutshell to Mortarion, which is interesting because that's the first time I think that the Emperor said, like there was a way to bring you back from that fate. He said something kind of similar to Horus at the end of the end in the death, blah blah. Sorry about that. End in the death volume of books. That's a kind of a tongue twister. And in that he said essentially that he said, "I forgive you and I wait for you," to Horus, suggesting that when he destroyed Horus's soul, there would be a way for his soul to come back. But again, everything with the Emperor is kind of cryptic. Even throughout the books that we finally get to see him in action in, everything is kind of symbolic and steeped in metaphor, and nothing is ever straightforward with him. But we do have a pretty good grasp on why the Chaos Gods wanted to destroy the Emperor, and why they started the Horus Heresy, and that's because the Emperor has the unique ability, as the most powerful human psyker to ever live, to not only concentrate the most power from the warp for his use, but he can also purify warp energy, which is the only psyker known to do that. Magnus Red couldn't do that and fell to chaos. Malkador couldn't do that, and he died on the throne. Ahriman can't do it. No psyker, whether human or Aeldari or anything else, has ever shown to do what the Emperor specifically does. It is the main purpose as to why he is a threat to the Chaos Gods, because he is one of the only beings, if not the only one, whose power can wipe out parts of the Chaos Gods directly. Normally, when you destroy a demon prince or a greater demon, or even a regular demon, their essence, what warp energy animates them in the real world, goes straight back to the warp, and they can eventually reform and come back into real space at a later date. It's why the Inquisition and Grey Knights keep a book of banished dates of the demon princes and greater demons they cast back to the warp, because they also can kind of get an idea of when that demon prince will come back and then look for it. Now, so far, the Emperor's energies have only been seen to destroy chaos corruption and destroy demons. Even objects imbued by his power, like his sword, can alone. We've seen that with Goleman. Now that he has the Emperor's sword, that sword has destroyed several demons outright in the Dark Imperium novels. So the Emperor can also imbue something with his abilities for destruction on the warp planes. But what we have not seen yet is this energy being somehow retuned or focused to maybe completely rid a being of chaos corruption, but keep that being intact. And until the reimagining of the final fight with Horus, it used to be kind of the case that his energy did do that with Horus, that when the Emperor finally pulled on the last reserves of his power, or the full reserves of his power, maybe more so than last, that for a time the corruption of Horus retreated. But really all that happened in that case, the way they actually did it in the end of the series, was the Emperor deceived Horus into relinquishing a lot of his power that the Chaos Gods had given him, and then went in for the kill. And when Horus realized he was tricked and the Chaos Gods saw what he had done, they tried to push all of the power that they gave him back into him. And that's when he realized that he was nothing but a puppet to them. But by no means was the Emperor having saved his soul at this point, or made him clean from chaos corruption in those moments. If anything, Horus just simply Horus was still himself here, but just imbued with his power, but he realized he would never be able to relinquish it, that the Chaos Gods did have him ensnared in this final bit of the final part of that conflict. But then the Emperor does say to Horus that he forgives him and that he waits for him. So how is the Emperor waiting for Horus? Because essentially the Emperor stabbed him through with a Athame blade, and those things destroy souls. Those things are some of the most potent weapons in existence. The Emperor channeled his power through that into Horus and seemed to obliterate him completely. Soul, body turned to basically just a skeleton left in his Terminator armor. Like, there was nothing left of Horus after what the Emperor did. So, as with anything with the Emperor, he knows more about the setting and the backstory of it than we will ever be privy to. That's one of the more unique things. Like, we as an audience, as the fourth wall looking into this universe, know so much about this universe. We know so much than almost any POV character we are part of in that universe, if you think about it. Most Space Marines that we're following kind of just are very focused. They know their mission objectives, they know their brotherhood, and they want to serve the Emperor. They're pretty simple in terms of what their scope is, what they are wanting to do. Sure, it's a brutal existence, and they have great abilities at that existence to try to survive as much as they can, given the brutality of it, but they don't know, huge, deep secrets about the setting. The only people who tend to are like the Inquisitors, but even then, they don't know a lot of what we know as an audience. And on some things, we do know more than the Emperor, but the Emperor is the single being that knows so much about the warp that who knows what he actually knows, because he is not saying. Any time that the Emperor deals with the warp, you can tell he knows a lot, and you can tell he is just fine with it, but whether someone can be cleansed of chaos corruption or not is something that he kind of has suggested at this point. He's never demonstrated it yet, though. And I'm kind of curious if we will get a demonstration. If we will see one of the fallen Chaos Primarchs come back as a loyalist. I really kind of hope not, because that just kind of takes away from, the tragedy of the Horus Heresy to, have the Emperor be like, yeah, I could just, bring you guys back whenever. That makes the story kind of weak, in my opinion. But if they did it, if he was able to retrieve Magnus the Red back, which I think if he was able to do this, he would choose Magnus, because Magnus has the most utility to him, and the Emperor does kind of treat the Primarchs like tools, and Magnus sitting on the Golden Throne would be probably a great benefit to mankind, with the Emperor being able to get up and out of it, if the Emperor is healing and able to move again. And then if the throne is needed still, Magnus would still be the other option for it, and who was made for it, so that the Emperor didn't have to manage it. So if this is possible, then it's Magnus, in my opinion, that the Emperor would choose, not Mortarion, even though he hinted that at Mortarion. I think he might have done that mostly to mock Mortarion, since he's kind of just always been a jerk. But otherwise, basically, with Magnus, it was represented as, his corruption was represented as, his flesh infused with, endless parasites throughout its flesh when Vulcan was fighting him in the webway at the end of the Horus Heresy. And Vulcan basically could see just how embedded the corruption was in him. But if the Emperor can tune his energy to not obliterate chaos and infected Primarchs, then maybe those types of parasites could be cleansed from his system, if that's what the Chaos Gods are using to essentially infect a mortal with, being partially the warp, essentially, is what demon princes and greater demons are. And so, since a demon prince used to be mortal at one point, it seems like their mortal part is infused with the warp stuff, and maybe you could purge that back out of them. I'm not sure. It's speculated and thought that Primarchs are essentially some kind of warp entity to begin with, that the Emperor crafted a human form around, although that's always been kind of suggested and pointed towards, but never outright said either. Some people think that the Emperor straight up stole these beings from the Chaos Gods, which is why they went back and took them, but nothing points to that. But if that is the case, if the Chaos Gods originally had the Primarchs as their servants and the Emperor stole them away from the gods and then used some kind of ability or power to purge the chaos from them, then that makes a lot of sense, that the Chaos Gods would come back for essentially their own creations or parts of themselves that were stolen by the Emperor. But none of that has been confirmed as being the case. The closest we get to is that essentially each of the Primarchs are some kind of minor warp deity of some kind, or minor warp being that wasn't aligned with the gods, wasn't of chaos, maybe was a leftover of the previous part of the warp that was not part of the realms of chaos, because there are still deeper parts of the warp and other parts of it that, even though the warp does not have a physical form, essentially there's parts of it that even the Chaos Gods do not tread to or do not meddle with, because it's either dangerous for them or they have limits, and we just don't really comprehend what those limits are. But the Emperor might, and that's why he might have decided to do what he did with possibly stealing some of their power or beings from under their noses. Maybe they had them imprisoned. The Primarchs don't seem to remember, so the Primarchs themselves don't have any knowledge of living in the warp or what they were before the Emperor created them. So that's important to note. I mean, like someone like Magnus the Red has never said or brought up that before his corruption that, he knew of anything that he was before becoming Magnus the Red. There's nothing pointing directly to it. The closest we get, really, is Russ having a conversation with himself from a different timeline where he never left Terra that suggests that they were taken from the warp as beings. But that is still kind of unreliable narrator a bit. It's not, I don't think, meant to take as ironclad proof of this. So the key to chaos cleansing is the Emperor. Is there anything beyond the Emperor for this? Not that I know of. I guess it'd be interesting to see if, let's say you've got like some Chaos Marines in real space. Let's say Abaddon is in real space, and we have the Necrons finally able to find a way to shut off the warp completely from real space. Like, what would happen to someone like that? Like, that is essentially tied to the Chaos Gods so closely. Would they just die of shock from the disconnect, so to speak? Would really powerful sorcerers just fall over and die? Maybe. The feedback would probably be too much, or like the lack of feedback anymore might be too much for their adaptations to handle. It is said that if the Necrons were to do that, that most beings, like humans and others that have at least a small connection to the warp, would eventually fade away and disappear nearly entirely. I mean, with humans, they would certainly be diminished down to just the pariahs that would exist. And who knows if there's enough pariah to, mate with each other to have enough children to keep the species going, whether the Necrons would want that to begin with. But essentially, I don't know if cutting someone off from the warp would essentially cure them of chaos. Maybe. If, there's no way for that dimension to meddle with real space anymore. Perhaps, causing that part of your soul to go out like a light might be able to keep you from being corrupted, but I think it also has been said that you would become kind of a listless drone almost, like you would essentially become soulless, right? And losing your soul in Warhammer is detrimental, just like it is in other fantasy settings where you lose your soul, you kind of become, almost nothing as a personality, or you lose essential characteristics about yourself that are considered important. But the Necrons don't seem to have an answer for corruption either. And then, as touched on earlier, the Aeldari don't seem to either. The closest the Aeldari get is preserving their souls in soul gems when they die for the craft world Eldar. And then the Drukhari just kind of stave off Slaanesh by doing their methodologies to, put a soul in proxy to be slowly devoured by Slaanesh over themselves. But they don't seem to have a methodology for curing themselves of that, or stopping any form of corruption from occurring for them either, other than just fighting off chaos. But it's important to note, if you've never noticed this, perhaps now is a good time to point it out to you, that the Aeldari don't seem to have Chaos Eldar. Have you ever noticed that? That doesn't seem to exist. Apparently it used to maybe exist in older lore, but these days it seems like it would be just too dangerous of a position for an Aeldari to have, because Like if they get too much attention from Slaanesh, then that Chaos God will devour their soul. If they call too much power to themselves, too much attention, it seems like it's just too dangerous of a game to play to have Chaos pay attention to you as an Aeldari, when one of the 4 of those Chaos Gods is intrinsically tied to your species and basically has an addiction to your type of soul, essentially. But because the Aeldari don't seem to have any form of, like, being corrupted by Chaos directly, at least, like, the closest we have is, like, the Drukhari, I guess. But because we don't see, like, Chaos Aeldari factions, my thinking is that the Aeldari don't really put much thought into curing anyone of Chaos. It's possible the Yunari, like, one of the Yunari, the main Yunari leader, Yvain, she was able to turn a Rubric Marine, one of the ones we fight in Space Marine 2, she was able to turn one of those back into a normal Space Marine. And I don't know if he was Chaos corrupted, or if he was just how he was during the Great Crusade at that point. And that could point to possibly, reverting someone from a Chaos state, although I don't know if that Marine was at all Chaos corrupted before the Rubric, so it may just be that he was reverted back to his normal self, which had no Chaos corruption to begin with. I'm not sure there. It's a very short little thing that's kind of used as a distraction for Ahriman, so that Yvain could do what she wanted and not have to fight with Ahriman directly. But that's the closest we get with the Aeldari, and then no other species that I'm thinking of have any sort of knowledge of the warp. Like, humanity has some of the most knowledge of the warp to fight against it at this point, to manage it, to defeat it. If humanity is known at this point for losing a lot of their knowledge, the knowledge they have gained over 10,000 years has been how to fight Chaos pretty effectively. They're still ineffective in a lot of ways. They're still very dogmatic in ways that are inflexible to the point where they get themselves in trouble. But if something could be said that they've been working on, it's that, and that kind of is seen as worship of the Emperor. And since they're the archenemy, that's something that you can kind of develop new methods and find and discover new methods to fight against effectively, and it'll be approved because you're technically serving the Emperor anytime you fight Chaos, and find ways to fight Chaos would be sanctioned, I would say, as probably a main way to worship the Emperor in a lot of cases. But other species beyond the Aeldari and humans and the Necrons, other than those 3, like the Tau don't know Chaos other than it being super scary. The Tyranids have adapted fleets to fight Chaos, but nothing they do purges Chaos energy and keeps something alive. Tyranids are just consuming everything and fighting anything in their path. The Orcs are immune to Chaos, but that's only because they have utter belief in their patron saints, or their patron gods, Gork and Mork. And then, other than that, a lot of the other smaller minor species, we don't know much about what they know, I guess. Like someone like the Hrud, or any other the other species we have to study. We don't know much about them to begin with, nor what their knowledge would be on the subject. And it's not like the Imperium is going to go try to ask them. Anyone in the Imperium that would be in a position to ask them is probably not going to be the one to find them. Probably someone a bit more trigger happy is going to find them first, which just is part of the setting. Like, you got the more trigger happy types that are often finding the knowledge that they shouldn't and then destroying it before it can be useful. That's just a common trope in this universe. And so this is kind of where I'm going to wrap it up. So basically, all we know is that it's possible, maybe, that the Emperor can cleanse corruption from somebody. But otherwise, so far, it's been an impossibility. We've seen nothing but, having to purge corruption, to burn it, quite literally with purifying flame. And we see that in Space Marine 2. They burned the Chaos corrupted areas with flamethrowers. They were very thorough in, burning and destroying anything that seemed to be touched by Chaos, because that is currently the answer. And even beings like the Grey Knights, they don't have a way to do it either, and they still just employ methods to make sure things are purified. And the only purification is through death, oftentimes. Now, there is, purity tests given to suspects of corruption, like That's what happened to Uriel Ventress of the Ultramarines. I don't think Titus went through this, but I mean, Titus might have through experiments when he was imprisoned by an Inquisitor, but Titus had to actually get tested by Grey Knights to prove his incorruptibility, and he was able to prove that. But oftentimes, beings aren't even given the chance to prove it. If you're suspected of chaos corruption, oftentimes people in authority are going to just be safe rather than sorry, and not wait for you to turn into a chaos portal and let a tidal wave of demons come through on their world. Instead, they're just going to preemptively stop that. Just like if you ran into an animal that you suspected had rabies, you're probably going to have, the animal control folks come take care of that, because rabies is rabies. You don't want to deal with it. You can't cure rabies. Same thing with chaos. Seemingly, you can't cure it. So that is about it for this one. So if you are still here, thanks for listening to me talk about this for the last 45 minutes, and I hope you leave a subscribe if you have not already subscribed. And if you are subscribed, thank you. And if you want to leave a comment, I love talking with you, as always. And I will see you in the next video. Hope you have a great day or night wherever you are. Talk to you soon. Because rabies is rabies. You don't want to deal with it. You can't cure rabies. Same thing with chaos. Seemingly, you can't cure it. So that is about it for this one. So if you are still here, thanks for listening to me talk about this for the last 45 minutes, and I hope you leave a subscribe if you have not already subscribed. And if you are subscribed, thank you. And if you want to leave a comment, I love talking with you, as always. And I will see you in the next video. Hope you have a great day or night wherever you are. Talk to you soon.